Don't you hate it when you're just starting out and you're given a task, but it's just really difficult? Such as if I had to do rock climbing and I'm pretty bad with heights, I would feel like it's quite unrealistic. This is why it's important for you to make sure that the task that you are given is not unrealistic and it actually makes sense. Let's get into it. Students and parents may come to us with a unique problem. They may package it in a certain way, but essentially the gist of it is largely goes down to a couple of different categories. Sometimes the student is not performing well because the parents, they may be giving them questions that are way outside their depth and they don't really know the basics. So they actually struggle to answer the questions, and we can kind of see that in the marks when they're actually doing that exam. Or on the flip side of things, they're given questions that are way too easy. The students are actually developing a sense of boredom because they're not stimulated enough and they feel like they're just doing the same thing over and over again and they're not learning and actually being challenged enough. That is why it's important for students to have an achievable yet realistic challenge and task, as opposed to being given a task which is absolutely unattainable and not realistic at all. Achievable challenge tasks require a degree of concentration, but not push them to the extent where they're so frustrated and they're bawling their eyes out because they've spent so much time trying to understand or answer certain questions. There needs to be a fine blend between challenge to make it a little bit more difficult, as opposed to those that are spending time so that you can actually get it. If you're spending hours and hours on the exact same topic and you're so frustrated and you feel like you're going to pull out your hair, it's a sign that the question's way too difficult. If they're finishing their homework and you notice that they finish all their homework in a day in just 20 minutes, and you don't really see them do much homework, it says that's a sign where your homework that your child is given is way too easy. There needs to be a balance between both sides in order for you to get the most out of your child. The benefits of a realistic challenge is really demonstrated where if a student is given a task through effort and a degree of hard work, they can actually succeed and solve that problem. When this works as intended, this can actually bypass the amygdala in your brain, which essentially regulates your ability to learn. This especially happens when you're feeling stressed or frustrated. For instance, if your parent gives you a task which is way too challenging, you're not going to be able to learn because you're too stressed out. You have too much pressure. An achievable and realistic challenge, on the other hand, allows students to perform at the most optimal state. It actually allows them to experience a heightened sense of dopamine, which makes you feel really good. Typically, you would feel dopamine after sport, which is kind of why after every time you do sport, you feel you've accomplished something. You feel really happy doing it. This can also occur when you're actually solving problems in a row and you really understand what you're doing. When you're giving an unrealistic challenge, which is very difficult to achieve, you don't get that dopamine rush and you will trigger that amygdala in your brain, which will stop learning altogether. This was actually developed in a study by Kinas, who also found out an interesting insight where when they do experience a task which is married up to their actual skill level and they have a degree of pressure when they're actually completing that task as well, they have reduced anxiety and have positive attitudes toward that task as well. One of the strategies that could really maximize this is to make sure that you provide questions that are suitable to the student's skill level. If they're really bad at math, then just give them easier questions. Don't be giving them really tough questions just because, well, they're usually bad at math and they're pretty good at English. I'm just going to give them maths questions that are just as hard as their English ones. The skill levels in those individual subjects don't even marry up. Don't do that. Instead, take a step back and just know that if you actually teach them and give them unrealistic tasks, they can actually have bad consequences in the long run. You don't want this and you want to address this as early as possible. Instead, give them a challenge and a task, go through how to actually do this, but typically a good measure of thumb is if they're spending 15 to 20 minutes on one individual question without much success, then it's a sign that it might be too difficult. And if they are spending too few time allocated to each question. So if they're answering each question in just a couple of seconds, you can actually show that the questions are too easy in difficulty level. This is also the case where you change up the variation of the question. So if you change up the numbers or you rearrange the words in an actual question and they're still able to solve that in a really quick manner, then it's just too easy. You're ready to step up the difficulty level and introduce an entirely new topic. If this is not the case and they are still spending quite a considerable amount of time answering those questions with a very small variation, it could mean that this is a sweet spot and you want to continue on with this until they can solve it in a much faster way. On a similar note, for students who are extremely behind and really do need that extra support, don't add fuel to the fire and just give them questions that are too difficult. Make sure the questions are a challenge for them, yet are solvable with the right support. Give them a question and give them prompts as much as you need. So when you know that they are blanking out and they're not too sure what the exact next step is, then give them a prompt and give them a suggestion, steer them in the right direction. This allows them to gain more confidence towards that subject, especially if they have that negativity towards it and they know themselves that they are weak. These students in particular react poorly to failure, so it's important for us to give them as much encouragement and positive affirmation as possible. Sometimes this is not needed for other students, but students who are extremely behind, this is absolutely critical where you are giving them realistic challenges. Another strategy is actually doing video games and actually playing that and seeing how we can apply that into teaching our children and students. When we are playing video games, we are not doing it for the objective of prize money and fame. Well, in most cases, unless you're a professional gamer. Generally, we are doing this to level up our character, try to achieve the end goal, or to get better and better, especially when it comes to ability-based games. In these games, they require a degree of ability in order to get really good at something. If you wanted to be professional, or if you really wanted to make something quite extraordinary, then it is possible. When you first start out, then you kind of know the gist of it. So this is what you want to do when you are trying to teach your kids, because you want to give them something where they might know some elements of the question, but not all the elements of the question. And over time, when they get really good at something, they can become really proficient at that. If a video game is very easy, for instance, you would actually get bored quite quickly. All those games that are easy to beat and you might, vanquish the monster, get a really high score, do you play that over and over and over again? Most likely not. Let's use Minecraft, for instance, which actually has a realistic and achievable challenge from the very beginning. So when you first play Minecraft, you are placed in a world where you are given the ability to create things and make things and dig things. At the beginning, the biggest thing you can actually make is probably a pickaxe. Maybe you can dig around the ground and you can make small tools for you to make bigger and better things. Over time though, you can create equipment for yourself, so you can vanquish monsters, you can create big luxurious mansions. The possibilities are endless, which is kind of why Minecraft is so popular and successful, because they're always giving you attainable and realistic challenges from the very beginning. So if you were a novice playing the game, you will enjoy it, as well as if you're really, really pro at it. You're making these big things, and the bigger the creation that you want to create, the more ability that you actually have to learn. This exact principle can be applied to maths, for instance. Yes, when you're answering a question, there might involve multiple maths principles that in order for you to really understand in order to solve the problem. But if you already know one or two of them and you're only missing one of them, then all you need to do is to learn the remaining one, or sort of see how the two principles that you already know can actually solve the missing principle that you're trying to get in that particular question. So try to apply the learnings from video games and to sort of see how we can use this to benefit us when learning different subjects such as math, English, or anything else really. The last strategy that I would like to share is to celebrate the successes. We want students to associate hard work with positive thinking. So the dopamine receptors in your mind, which allows you to feel happy and good after doing a challenging task, is always activated when you're doing positive schoolwork Or if you're studying hard, then we want to activate those receptors again as well. So after they've learnt and applied a concept in English or math, for instance, and they're able to answer different questions with variations, they've done a pretty good study session, and they were adequately challenged throughout, then we want to be able to praise them and compliment them for their hard work. If they've studied for an hour and a half and they weren't mucking around or anything like that, they actively learnt and put a lot of concentration in that, then maybe you can reward them by giving them some food, such as like a snack. Obviously, you still have to give them food. Maybe it's like some Tim Tams, or you allow them to play with the park with some schoolmates in the evening. The possibilities are quite flexible here, where whatever works for your child in order to help stimulate and motivate them, then you give it to them after they've done good work. You don't really want to be motivating them and rewarding them in terms of making them associate not doing hard work with a positive reward, because that's going to be really disastrous in the future too. We only want to reward them if they've displayed hard work. We don't want them to think like, hey, well, I'm just bumming around, I'm just not doing anything at all, and I'm still getting to go to the park with my friends. I'm still getting to eat all these snacks in my wardrobe. Anything that I want to do, I can do, so why should I even study in the first place? That's not the mindset we want, and it's going to be even more difficult for us to change that if this is something that they're originally thinking. Another way to help us really encourage positive memories is for your child or the student to actually teach someone else the skill that they learned. So if they learn fractions and they really understand it now, then try to make sure they maybe teach their younger brother, teach a peer or another classmate that they have who lives in the neighborhood who doesn't really get it yet, and they can actually teach them. Or maybe they can both kind of teach each other that particular concept because they really understand that math concept. It's very important for us to make that connections, or maybe you can even do a photo wall. So if they kind of know a new concept at school, or if they learn a new topic, then maybe take a photo with them, actually with that completed response with the big tick. Literally take a photo with them, have a Polaroid and put it on a wall. And it's a wall full of their achievements and accomplishments of all the maths concept that they've learned in that year, for instance. I don't know if you want to do that, but it's just an idea which I think could be beneficial. In conclusion, students need to be given an achievable and realistic challenge in not only their schoolwork, but when they're learning at home as well. If they are not given a task that is realistic and achievable, then we can actually get drawbacks. We can get consequences that are unintended, and even though we didn't want them to occur, such as not being motivated or finding the work actually very boring, or they might even feel negativity towards a particular subject, then that's not going to be our ideal outcome either. Instead, I've gone through a couple of great strategies that you can actually employ so that they don't think about that, and we can try to find a good blend between something that is not too hard and not too easy, and to find the optimum level for them to actually progress as quickly as possible. The time that they have when they're young will fly by very quickly, so it's very important for them to be adequately challenged across the entire way. It's a big reason why here at Biggs Academy, we only do one-on-one tutoring, because we have to give realistic challenge for each individual student. Something that is a realistic and achievable challenge will be different student to student, so we never do group tutoring. I think that method of group tutoring is a little bit flawed, and it's a big reason why you kind of see in a primary school, for instance, you see some students who will always be ahead and some students who will always be falling behind. But the teacher has to cater to the large majority, and sometimes there are going to be some cases where some people are just not going to get the extra support that they need because the task is either too easy or it's too difficult. But the people in the middle will kind of win out there. In saying that though, thank you guys so much. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, or you had any comments with that, please let me know down in the comments below. It actually motivates me to create more videos for me to share with you guys. But essentially, see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much.